Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is, you see the title, Stuck in Middle School. We've all been to middle school. Now, some of you may have memories of middle school. Some of you may have forgotten middle school, because most of you listening, I would venture to say that it's been a while since you've been in middle school. If you're like me and you're a parent, you have had kids. Maybe some of you have had kids who have gone through middle school. But I had recently had an experience that really made me think about my middle school years. At the time of this recording, as many of you know, my wife and I have 4 children. Our 3 oldest sons, who are 25, 22, and 18 at the time of this recording, all went through middle school. Right now, our daughter, Skylar, she's currently in middle school. She's in the 8th grade, so she's finishing up middle school and headed to high school next fall, which is crazy when I think about it. And I'm sure probably crazy for a lot of you, because you remember when Skylar was born, if you've been following me on social media. And it's a little different because obviously she's the only girl and she's, my daughter. So we talked about on previous episodes about being spoiled. She is spoiled. I mean, come on, man. I mean, you got a father and 3 brothers. You're going to be spoiled. But recently she was recognized at their honors program, Honors Day. And she won a couple of awards for Honors Day. One being, she made the All-A honor roll, which is something that a young 12 Kyle could have only hoped to do in 8th grade. Getting an A was good, let alone all A's in all subjects. But what was interesting was, as I sat in the ceremony, I just kind of looked around, and as I looked around, I just noticed, some of the 6th graders, some of the 7th graders, and some of the 8th graders. And as I looked around the room, the assembly, I didn't see a lot of cool kids. I'm not going to call these kids nerds, but I didn't see a lot of cool kids. I didn't see a lot of kids with swag. I didn't see a lot of fly kids. I didn't see a lot of kids that were just like, what I would probably deem, popular kids. And again, I don't know any of these kids, because I just know my kid and her friends. That's it. And they're pretty popular. But not a lot of cool kids. And as I sat in that ceremony, I noticed some of the kids, particularly as they walked up to get their awards. Some of them walking very fast, some of them walking very slow, some of them walking very awkward, because they're in a assembly and they're in this room, and it's a bunch of people. It's just parents. The kids were in the middle, and the parents were in the bleachers. It was in a gym. That's where they held it. And the kids were sitting in chairs on the floor, and the parents were in bleachers on both sides of the gym. And, I just noticed a lot about some of these kids. And like I said, they separated them by 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. Now, when I was in middle school in Florence, South Carolina, middle school was only 7th and 8th grade. Here, it's 6th, 7th, and 8th. But you see a lot. I saw quite a few tall kids, and you could tell those kids probably had tall parents. So a lot of shorties too. A lot of kids who just, really hadn't hit that growth spurt yet. And, a lot of them really are kind of, you're at that age where, and my daughter included, you're kind of figuring out your body. Most of these kids are hitting puberty. So for some of the young men, their voices are changing. I even saw a little girl, and I felt kind of bad for her because she was a fair-skinned young black girl, and she had a little facial hair as far as above her lip. That's tough. I mean, like, you don't have any control over where your hair grows and how it grows and everything like that. And to have, hair above your lip as a young lady, that's got to be tough. But yeah, you could kind of tell that, some of them really are trying to get comfortable in their bodies because their bodies are growing. And again, they're going through puberty. So you're experiencing these things, you're feeling different things. I just remember puberty was a wild time for me because, now all of a sudden, those waterhead girls ain't waterhead girls no more. They starting to look kind of cute, kind of fly. And so it being in that room really made me kind of think back to a very, very tumultuous and not so settling time in my life. It was probably I would venture to say that middle school probably was the toughest 2 years that I had in my lifetime. A lot of stuff was going on. As many of you know, maybe you don't know, my parents got divorced right before I went to 7th grade. So from childbirth up until the summer of after my 6th grade year, my parents were always together. They were together. And one of the things I always say about their divorce in particular, that divorce really changed a lot of what I saw in people. It lessened my faith in people. It made me kind of guarded to where I really didn't trust people like that. Because here's the thing, like my parents, and I've said this on previous episodes, and it's worth repeating. My parents never argued in front of us. It's me and my younger brother, Damon, who's 3 years younger than me. They never argued in front of us. And so I think I remember hearing my mom and dad argue one time, like the whole time they were married. And so imagine, you're going through life, everything's happening or whatever like that. Everything's cool. And then one day your parents get you together and they say, hey, we're getting a divorce. And I mean, it hit us like a ton of bricks. It hit me like a ton of, I don't know, how much it impacted Damon at that particular time, because I was almost I think I was going on 14. So I was 13 and he was 10. So, we were handling things differently. And again, it would be different. It would have been an easier pill for me to swallow if I'd seen my mom and dad argue all the time. It'd be an easier pill to swallow if, I'd see my dad beating my mom or something like that. That you understand why they're getting a divorce, but just to come out of nowhere and, again, never arguing in front of us, never even hearing an argument. Now, I can't even say that because my kids have heard my wife and we try not to argue in front of the kids. And we pretty much, when we argue away from the kids, but they've heard us argue. But not like that, not to the point where, we're going to get a divorce. And so it was a shocker. And then subsequently from, the divorce, we moved. So we left the house that my parents had purchased. And we moved to the other side of our city in North Florence, North Florence. And so now, but I was still going to be going to the same middle school, which was Williams Middle School. But I was in a new neighborhood, and it wasn't like a foreign neighborhood because we were moving into the house where my aunt and my cousins lived. And it was fine because we had plenty of space, but and we would go over there all the time and stuff. So I knew everybody in the neighborhood and everybody was cool. And I had friends there. My cousin Eric, we were in the same grade. That's my right-hand man. So it wasn't like it was something foreign, but it was something, it was a total shock. And so we moved. And so now I'm going to this middle school. And I've said this on the podcast before. My first day of middle school, I stepped off the bus. I didn't know anybody, because here's the thing. The kids that I went to middle school with, most of them went to Southside, middle school called Southside. So most of the kids went to Southside. We had a handful go to Moore Middle School. but everybody else went to Southside Middle School, and there was a handful of us that went to Williams Middle School because that's where we were zoned to go to school. So I wasn't changing schools, but even in going from 6th grade to 7th grade, I wasn't going to be around the kids and my friends that I knew since 1st grade, right? So it's a new school. I'm in a new home. And don't get it to us. It wasn't like I was in, like we were in, the Cabrini Green projects. I mean, we were in a really nice house in a very cool neighborhood. We had a pool. We had a huge driveway with a basketball rim, and we played basketball. I mean, like, it was the suburban of the suburbanist, if that's a word. So it wasn't like we moved from, one good neighborhood to a bad neighborhood. We moved from a good neighborhood to a great neighborhood. And that's where I grew up, and that's where I spent my high school and college years. And, interestingly enough, the house that my parents were in, my mom never sold a house. She just rented it out. And then she eventually ended up moving back by the time we went to college, or by the time I graduated from college, I should say. And she still has that house, and that's where she still lives to this day. But we moved to my aunt's house, and it was really a struggle for me to accept the fact that my dad was no longer in the house. So middle school, that time was wild. And I just remember my first day of middle school, I stepped off the bus and I didn't know anybody because for whatever reason, I don't know that even though Eric and I are in the same house, I think when we got off the bus, we went separate ways. I can't remember which way he went, but he just like disappeared. And I just remember I was just walking and some kid said, "What's up?" And I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And we started talking, and it's like 4 other kids came over to where we were. And I didn't realize like these were the shall I say the nerds. I didn't know. I mean, like I was hanging with the nerds, and I was like the cool kid on the first day hanging with the nerds. But I wasn't that cool, at least I'll put it like this. I was cool, but I had to get my props because you're at a new school. You got to get props. But yeah, middle school was a struggle, man. 7th and 8th grade. And I struggled. I found myself struggling in subjects that I did not struggle in before, math in particular. I was a math whiz in elementary school. And I think most of us probably can say that because it's what? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So it's pretty easy, right? But by the time you get to middle school, you're starting to deal with algebra. And even to this day, X plus Y equals Z, that means nothing to me. That makes no sense. It didn't make sense in 86. It's not going to make any sense now. And so, and I hate to tell this to you kids who may be listening or watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. You'll never use that again in life. You're never going to be at a job unless you're an engineer and somebody ask you what X plus Y equals Z. What is that? No, you'll never see that. You'll never see geometry again. Study and pass the class, but kids, you'll never see it again. But yeah, I struggled big time. I remember being in Mrs. Thompson's class. Shout out to Mrs. Thompson if she's in. Ms. Thompson probably is in her, I would guess Ms. Thompson's probably in her 90s by now. I'm pretty sure Ms. Thompson's still alive because mean people never die. Mean people stick around for a long time. And I'm not speaking out of turn and calling Ms. Thompson mean. She was very mean, but she was a really good teacher, but she was mean. She didn't make and she taught math. She didn't make learning fun. And I struggled in her class. And then I was actually kind of being somewhat of a class clown in her class too. So that didn't make it any easier. So a couple of times I got kicked out of class, right? So I got kicked out of class. Me and shout out to Delonte Jackson. Man, that cat, every time I see him or talk to him, and it's been a minute, man, it's always reminiscent about getting kicked out of Miss Thompson's class in 8th grade. But yeah, me and Delonte Jackson and my boy Jay Fresh, shout out to Jay Fresh. We would get kicked out of class all the time. I mean, like, and Miss Thompson would, if you got an answer wrong, sometimes she'd come by and she'd punch you in the chest or she'd punch you in the arm. I mean, like, this is at the time, she was an older woman teaching middle school math, and she would punch us and stuff like that, kick us out of class. she'd say something and like you'd say something and you, like I remember one kid said, "I'm going to tell the principal." She was like, "I don't give a damn," and we were like, "Wow." She was like, "I don't give a." She was like, "I've been working here forever." She was like, "If they fire me, I'm gonna get my retirement and I'm just gonna go about my business." And she was pretty much right. Like nobody ever reported her. She was, really rough teacher. But I struggled in classes like math. Wasn't really a fan of science. I never was a science fan, but I really became interested in social studies, probably more so in middle school. But yeah, I struggled. I struggled big time in the classroom, and I went from being an A and B student to getting a couple of C's, which was never allowed in my house when my parents were together. Like getting a C was like you might as well get an F because if you got a C, boy, you might get a spanking. You was gonna get on punishment. It was gonna be hell to pay. Like and what was interesting was I even remember some of my friends at school would be like, "Well, why is your mama tripping? Why is your dad tripping? Because you got a C." Like, but my mom and my dad knew, and they told us like, "You're not C students. So if you're not a C student, we'll never accept you getting a C because C's are for average, and you're not average. You're above average. You're a great student." And that was instilled in me, and I was up until that point. So yeah, I'm struggling. And then obviously the thing that gets amplified when you get to middle school is your interactions with the girls or the lack thereof. I was cool with the girls. I'll be honest. Seventh grade, it took me a minute to kind of warm up. So it was probably, I ain't really start probably cooking till like second semester. Because again, when I get there, I only know a handful of girls, and those are just the girls that I went to elementary school with. So I may know 10 girls at Williams when I get there. And again, you're there. Everybody's doing things. Bodies are changing. You're starting to see girls who are some who are way more developed than grown women. And so it's like, whoa, wow, look at that, and so I laugh every time I see the movie The Wood because, that remember that scene in The Wood where Mike had to get up in front of the class and caught a Woody and had to put the book over his pants. That may or may not have happened to your boy, but girls were it was just so, again, you got the hormones going. But I was never afraid to talk to girls, but it took me a minute to really kind of started really, really talking to girls. But it wasn't because of lack of confidence. It was just like I had so much crazy stuff going around me, especially with the divorce. And then I went from being in a house with my mom and my dad to being in a house with my mom and my aunt. And, living with two women, that ain't easy. At least it wasn't easy for me. But I love my aunt, love my mom. And then probably one of the things that really, really, one of the big memories I had from middle school was the yearbook. We had, I want to say, I was in 8th grade. We took a yearbook picture, and I remember taking the picture. I had on this like burgundy shirt. Wasn't nothing. I needed a haircut. So it wasn't a fly. I didn't think the picture was gonna be fly. At least I wasn't dressed fly, I should say. And that was another thing too. Like, now all of a sudden I don't have, both parents in the house, and I never knew my mom's financial situation or my dad's financial situation probably until I got older. But we always got what we wanted, and I remember asking my mom could she buy me some Air Jordans. And she was like, "No, boy, those Air Jordans cost $75. You think I'm going to spend $75 on some sneakers?" I mean, little did we know that, the price of sneakers would skyrocket 20 years later. But at that particular time, Jordans was like, it was a status symbol. So if you had Jordans, you were hot and you were fly. But the reality was I couldn't afford them. So, a lot of times now when I buy Jordans, I buy the Jordans that I couldn't afford back when I was in middle school. But I remember, not even having to fly some kicks. I remember I got some shell toe Adidas, and I could only wear those. I could only wear those to school. I couldn't wear them to go play. I couldn't wear them to nowhere, just to school. I couldn't even wear them if I went to the mall. But anyway, we took yearbook pictures, and the yearbook obviously got published later on in the year. But a wild thing happened. Okay, so obviously this is what, 87, I think. The yearbook comes out 87. It was the 86, 87 year, my 8th grade year. And I remember that because as many of you know, my uncle Harry Carson played for the New York Football Giants. We went to the Super Bowl in Pasadena where they played against the Denver Broncos, and they beat them. I think it was 39-20, I think, smoked them. But we went to Pasadena for the game. My first time in California, LA, had a ball. But I do remember it because it was that year. So shortly after we returned from the Super Bowl, the yearbook came out. And what was wild was it was obviously at this particular time, black and white pictures. I don't even know that there was any color pictures in the yearbook. Sorry, that was the time. We just did black and white pictures. But if you got individual pictures, they were colored. But the pictures in the yearbook were black and white, right? And so the pictures, for whatever reason, everybody's picture in the yearbook was darker. Like it was like the cameraman had a bad shade or something. So everybody's picture was darker. And that really didn't bode well for us dark-skinned brothers. Someone like myself in particular, who was very chocolate. So when the picture came out, and I wish I had a copy. If I had a copy of the picture, I'd put it up here on YouTube. The picture came out like it's really, really dark. So really the only thing you see are my eyes and my teeth. That's it. And I'm not even looking at the camera. I'm kind of looking away from the camera. And so naturally, when the yearbook comes out, everybody sees it. And so, you know, you open up the yearbook, you go to the page or whatever like that. So I go to the page, I see myself and I'm like, whoa. And so like everybody's coming with the, oh man, look at his black face jokes. Now listen, I'll let you in on a little secret. I thoroughly, especially all of my life, enjoyed being the hue that I am. I love my complexion. I love myself. I love me. And I've always thought that I was a handsome young man because my mama told me so at a very young age. So I didn't suffer from, being, there were some kids who had a color complex and, oh, you're too dark, or oh, you're too light or whatever. That stuff never bothered me because I knew who I was and I knew I was dope and I knew I was a handsome guy. I still am. Just a little grayer, that's all. But so it didn't bother me, but I remember kids coming trying to joke and I was like, man, whatever. And it didn't bother me. But I just remember that. And that was kind of like a turning point. Like I think things for me really just kind of turned up after that. I don't know why, but my grades got better. And we were finishing up the year. My grades got better. I had a girlfriend who had a Jerry curl. And, I was going to social events. I was going to parties. I was going to school dances and stuff like that. So I just remember that time really things started to kind of turn for the better. Wherein the first year and a half of middle school, it was rough. It was really, really rough. But I think when people saw that they could, or at least they thought they could come and joke me about how dark the picture was, and I wasn't bothered, it was like, okay, he's different. Like, he's not like everybody else. And the thing that always sticks with me about that particular time was I didn't lose who I was. I was coming into learning who I was. And I think that's a very important part of a young person's life. Right now, we got to take a quick commercial break, but on the other side of the break, I'll tell you about a great thing that happened to me in middle school. Sit tight. I'll be back in just a second. Are you feeling nostalgic for the golden eras of rap and soul music? If so, tune in to the Rap Soul Podcast. We are your weekly journey through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Spotlighting the music and the hidden gems that shape the soundtrack of our lives. From the powerful beats to the soulful melodies, we bring you the best of the past with fresh insights and stories. Rediscover the music that defined a generation. Subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast and enjoy the vibes. If you want a podcast where culture, conversation, and life collide, where you get insightful commentary, engaging discussions, and a fresh perspective on everything, then you need to listen to the 12 Kyle podcast. Hosted by the one and only, yours truly, 12 Kyle, a voice that you know and trust. This podcast will bring you thought-provoking moments, compelling stories, and a whole lot of fun. Whether you're a first-time listener or just tuning in, each episode promises to be something new and exciting. So sit back, relax, join 12 Kyle, myself, and my guests as we break down the world around us and give you stories that you've never heard before. From nostalgic throwbacks to everything in between, the 12 Kyle podcast is a front row seat to this conversation. Subscribe now and never miss an episode of the 12 Kyle podcast, where the vibe is always real and the discussion is always worth your time. And just like that, we are back. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle. This is the 12 Kyle podcast, and we're talking about stuck in middle school as I reminisce about my time in middle school. Before the break, I mentioned that something really, really great happened to me in middle school. I stumbled upon some friends, and these would become eventually lifelong friends. I mentioned like I didn't have a lot of friends when I got to Williams Middle School. I didn't really have a lot of gear. I remember a couple of times wearing pants and jeans that were just a little bit too high. I didn't keep like fly haircuts. I didn't have any Jordans. I didn't run, with a bunch of people. But what I did do, I met, I think the first person that I met was my boy Rudy. And Rudy lived around the corner from me. And one of my other friends, my boy Jay Fresh, I've known Jay Fresh since we were 6 years old because we went to the same church. And, I already knew Fresh, but then I found out that Fresh knew Rudy. And so Rudy introduced me to Ezel, and he introduced me to Fred, and he introduced me to Bill. And like all of a sudden, I really found my crew because I can't say that I was hanging with the nerd crew, but like for the first couple of weeks, I was hanging with the nerd crew because I didn't know anybody. And then you add Eric into the mix and my boy Travis, who lived up the street. So we had our own little crew. I mean, like they were already crew. And I think that was important because everybody that I mentioned has been lifelong friends. Like this is the crew. And when I talk about my crew, these are the guys that I've literally been running with since day one. I don't know. I know people come in and out of your life for different reasons, but I feel fortunate in the sense that I've never lost them. Like, I don't know. And maybe you can tell me if you have friends from middle school that you're still running with to this day, that you're still as tight with. I mean, like these guys, we were in each other's weddings. We were there for the birth of each other's children. We had times of hanging out as grown men, which, you've heard on this podcast about the bachelor parties and parties, hanging out at CIAA and all kind of crazy stuff. But we've had moments, the Carolina Classics. We had so many moments, and then we brought other people into the crew, like my boy D Love Hall. But meeting those guys and developing those friendships really, I think, helped me, in my journey to become who I eventually would become. I can't forget Dr. Jamel, who was she was in 7th grade when I was in 8th grade. I didn't even really hang with her like that, but I remember in a similar assembly like the one that I just attended, she won like every 7th grade award that you could win. Like, and they kept calling her name. So imagine like you go to the Grammys and somebody just keeps winning Grammy after Grammy after Grammy. And I remember like by the time she was on like her 7th award, They was like, student of the year. And somebody yells out, Jamel Felder. And she was embarrassed because she was a little tiny little girl. She had these big Coke bottle glasses, and she was really just developing into who she would become. And we, not in middle school, but by the time we got to high school, became super tight and still are super tight to this day. And you guys have heard her on here. That's one of my best friends. But yeah, all of these people would become crew. My boy Shav, can't forget about him. They became crew, and like I said, I haven't lost them as far as friends are concerned. Like, we're still tight to this day. I can still call Fred right now, and we'll be on the phone for 20, 30 minutes. Hey man, what you doing? Blah, 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 blah. You know, that type of thing. I don't talk to Fred as much, but we still talk. You know, me and Jay Fresh, we'll talk or text every day. And when I went out to LA, that was one of the first places I had to go. I had to go see my boy. And, you know, again, friends, like, we've literally watched each other grow. And I think that's important because, like, you never know the path that you will take in life. And sometimes it's not easy to maintain a friendship over a period of time. Sometimes circumstances happen. Sometimes things just happen. Sometimes people just grow apart. It happens. That's a part of life. But what was interesting was, like, even as I think back to those friendships, you know, there are other things that kind of happen along the way. Life happens, right? And I remember maybe about a month or so ago, I was talking to the homie, Uncle Dolomite. Shout out to Dolomite from the Too Much Game podcast. Dolomite and I were on the phone, and he brought up something that was interesting that I had never really thought about. Somehow we got on the subject of gangs. Dolomite grew up in a gang in Compton. Shout out to Nutty Block. And so he basically said something that I had never thought about, but he said something and I'm paraphrasing here. He was like, what if your 6 closest friends that you grew up with, and all of you guys are in middle school, they get put on by the local gang? What are you going to do? You probably are going to follow them. And I had never really thought about it, but let's just say that Rudy, Zell, Jay Fresh, Fred, Jay, Bill, Travis, all of these guys get put on by the Spalding Heights Crips. That's our neighborhood, Spalding Heights. So they get put on by the Spalding Heights Crips. Could I just walk away from that? Like, these are my boys. And now all of a sudden they rolling with the neighborhood gang. Now, granted, we lived in Florence, South Carolina. There were no gangs in 1988. But the flip side of it is that in his explanation, it really hit home how and why a young man in his formative years in middle school would join a gang. It didn't make any sense. I mean, excuse me. It made a lot of sense to me at that particular time. I think people really have these ideas as to why or how or why someone would join a gang. But at that moment, I mean, Dolomite says a whole bunch of stuff that makes tons of sense. But at that moment, it hit home. And so I understood how or why he got put on at that particular time that he got put on. And again, you're influenced by your friends and your friend. And really, there were times that, and I never said this to them, but there were times that the crew is all I felt like that I had. Like, I really couldn't talk to my mom. Didn't see I saw my dad on weekend. I saw my dad every weekend. We hung out, and my dad was also my coach in football. So I saw him every day during football season, and I saw him on the weekends. We go stay with him on the weekends. But even that dynamic changed because shortly thereafter, my dad, obviously he moves out and he gets his own place. And then my sister's born. Now, it don't take a rocket science for you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what happened. My sister was born like 8 months after my parents got divorced. So you do the math. And then my dad would eventually get married. So I've got this whole dynamic of dealing with seeing my dad and and we never stopped being close. My dad's still one of my best friends to this day. And we talk every day. And But imagine going through all of that, and then the only solace that you have is in the people that are closest to you. And if the people that are closest to you are now members of the Spalding Heights Crips, well, guess what? You're probably going to be a member of the Spalding Heights Crips. So I think meeting those guys and developing the friendship and the lifelong brotherhood that we have was paramount for the young man that I would become. Also, at that particular time, football changed for me. I was still playing Little League football, and I got crazy nice on the football field. I became I was always pretty good, but I was like a star on the football field, and I was still playing Little League football. I did not move up to middle school football. I didn't start playing that until, I never played middle school football. I went from Little League to junior varsity once I got to high school. But being that and having that confidence on the football field, I was always confident on the football field, and that confidence bled over into who I was off the field. I was always confident in the classroom, always confident with girls, just a very confident and self-assured person. The thing that rocked my confidence was the marriage that fell apart that I knew nothing about, that I just woke up one day and literally had my parents in tears sitting there telling us that they were going their separate ways. And, the one thing I remember my dad keeps saying was, you'll understand this as you get older. And I did, after I put two and two together and, kind of figured things out. But I mean, even then, even as I got older, there was still a level of distrust in people outside of my crew. Like, I trusted my crew, but I ain't really trust you like other people like that. I ain't really trust girls like that, to be honest, even though I was starting to, get into girls and talk to girls. And it wasn't until years later that I realized how much that divorce had adversely affected my ability to love. Like, I would let you get close, but you couldn't get too close. Like, I ain't play that. Like, because here's the thing, subconsciously, I put myself in a position where no one would ever hurt me like I was hurt that particular day when my parents told us they were going their separate ways. And was that fair in relationships? No, but you realize these things as you get older. Obviously, as I was able to get older and learn to love and open myself up for love, then I was able to receive love and, more importantly, give love as well. But middle school was rough, but meeting those guys, becoming friends with those guys, and then doing my thing on the football field really translated to me becoming more of who I was instead of a shell of who I could have been. And by the time I got to high school, the next year, things turned around for me. But those 2 years were rough. And as I sat in the honor ceremony, I could only think about, like, I would have loved to have been in an honor ceremony. I would have loved to have gotten all A's. Can I blame it on my parents? No, I can't. But because, listen, there was a part of me, and I'll be honest in saying this, there was a part of me that slacked off too, because I know that my mom wasn't the disciplinarian that my father was. So if I don't have my dad in the house every day, I don't have him on my neck. Now, my mom would get on my neck, but it wasn't the same. You know what I'm saying? So, and as you get older, you learn things. And I mean, like, I was just like those kids. I was that kid with not the flyest gear, didn't have a lot of game, but was cool and was cool enough with the girls to where I could get them to talk and get your phone number and laugh on the phone and all of that good stuff. But I was that kid. I was that kid who hit a growth spurt in elementary school and ain't hit no more growth spurts after that. But I was slowly developing and being Kyle. And, I have to thank myself, for doing what was necessary, but also listening to my parents and my aunts and my uncles in that particular time. A lot of times I didn't want to hear it, but as I sat in that, in conclusion, as I sat in that assembly, I just, I was amazed and very happy that, first and foremost, proud of Skylar, but also understanding that, like, her middle school years look nothing like mine. And I had to go through those experiences. So ultimately our sons didn't have them, and, she won't have them. but there are going to be moments where you're going to have to try to figure things out. And I tell my kids this all the time. You're going to have to figure it out. And like, I've got a lot of answers. I've got a lot of decisions. I've made a lot of decisions. I've made some bad decisions. But the thing is, I try to impart to my kids is that, ultimately, it's going to fall on you to make the right call. It's going to fall on you to make the right decision. I made some good decisions in middle school. I made some bad decisions in middle school. I made some lazy decisions in middle school. But ultimately, I got through it because I trusted God, and I trusted, God to guide me. But I wasn't so sure all the time. I wasn't so sure. I had people in my corner like Mrs. Singleton, Jay Fresh's mom, rest in peace. She was my course teacher. She would always get on my case, but she believed in me. She told me, she was like, look, you can be good. She was like, but you can't play around. Like she was like, there's a time she used to always say this, there's a time and a place for everything, Dowling. She called me by my last name. I had to call her Miss Singleton. I couldn't call her anything else. And it's funny because when Jay Fresh was in her class, he had to call her Miss Singleton too, even though that was his mom. But yeah, she said that all the time. There's a time and a place for everything, Dowling. Get yourself together, Dowling. And like, she would fuss at me in class, and then I'd be over at her house, like, hanging out with Jay Fresh later that evening. But really just surrounding myself with good people and, believing in who I was. And slowly but surely taking the lessons that I learned up until that point. And, I went from middle school to high school, and ultimately, I think I turned out okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. This podcast drops every Thursday at midnight. We're on all social media platforms. You can find us wherever you get podcasts. You can find us on social media. If you're on social media, Twitter X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. We're also, like I said, the podcast is everywhere. It's on all streaming platforms. Wherever you're listening right now, check it out. Check us out. We're on YouTube as well. Subscribe there, hit the like button, hit the notification button. That way you get notified when we drop episodes. We also drop bonus episodes from time to time on Sundays at midnight. Also, we have a new baby. It's called the Rap Soul Podcast. It is the intersection where we have discussions about artists and music from the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, soul, hip hop, and R&B. It is the best music podcast that you've never heard, so you should check it out. And that drops every Monday, and you can find that wherever you get your podcast, wherever you're listening right now. That's where you need to tap in. Also on YouTube. If you want to contribute to this podcast financially, a couple of things you can do. You can buy merch. We've got a link in the description box. Hit the link that says merch. You can buy 12 Kyle podcast t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs. We got it for the low. Also, you can hit us up on Cash App, $, TWELVEKYLE. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle, talking about being stuck in middle school. Once again, thank you for tapping in. I will catch you guys next time. 5 G's. Cheer.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.